operating areas outside of cities, but where there is urban services, namely water and sewer and transportation. This effort in 26 is to better blend that so that they are balanced with infrastructure, balanced with school capacity, fire district capacity as well. And so we at the county operate around the edges of the city, so to speak, although in cooperation with our neighboring cities to the degree we can. So like I said, today's effort is another step in that comprehensive plan. We're going to share what we learned before, and then we'll take some questions at the end. So I'll turn it over to Ian.
Thank you, Scott. Actually, I think we will, Lenny, my name's Ian from Makers. Nice to see you again. Folks that have been with us, joined here by Bob Bigford. We have a presentation that relates to the posters that you've seen. But first, if I can get the right slide to show, we'll have Riley talk a little bit about Cascadia's role. There.
Hi all, my name is Riley and I'm part of the Cascadia consulting team here with my colleague Carson. And we are working to do a climate vulnerability assessment for Spokane County. And as you can see up here, we have found some climate resiliency challenges and risks throughout the county that we are working to help inform and build adaptive capacity for. So helping these communities build in ways and plan for these changing climate events. Some of the most common ones throughout the county that many of you have already shared your experiences with include wildfire and wildfire smoke, increase in extreme temperatures, changes in precipitation, including extreme events like flooding, as well as drought, and some changes in stream flow and inland flooding with snowpack changes. Yeah, more or less the same stuff.
Great, thank you, Riley. As folks who were here before know, and folks who are here for the first time are learning. We're using placemaking as a lens to look at generally the land use element and some of the related elements for the comprehensive plan update. Placemaking is a broad concept, but it involves looking at the regulations and the policies that determine what can be built on a particular place. Roman, yeah. I'm in a tin can. I'll move closer to the microphone. And also with transportation and parks and trails and some of the related elements, and not looking at those as sort of mechanistically as separate things, but trying to think about how those important elements come together to create a place that is unique, that has meaning, that people make people feel good, people want to go to. Could be all sorts of different kinds of things. Could be a natural area, could be a neighborhood, could be a well-designed new subdivision, could be an urban node with apartments, and services and businesses, could be many different things. But there are some common elements, places that are accessible, well connected, in a part of a landscape with other points of meaning and importance in important places. These are comfortable, maybe attractive, they make you feel good to be there. And as a result, they bring people together. And when people are being brought together, they have all sorts of different kinds of interactions. And the more people coming for different reasons or different stages of their life or from different backgrounds, the more kinds of unique interactions are created. These are social environments that people are going to come back to over time. Great, okay. And now, we want to review what we've heard so far. We did a series of workshops in February. A few of you were here. We're also in Spokane Valley and talking about the east side of the urban growth areas, East Metro, and also in Meade on the north side of the city. We did also an online version of this, basically the engagement thing, asking people about what were some of the most. Here's some of the photos from the events, and getting around maps and talking about specific places also, and learning from you about what was really important to come in with new development, what we want to avoid, and when development happens, and just other important things to know about these areas. We heard that when development happens, understanding that some development happens, but there will be new development. And when it happens, we want integration of trails and open space. We want thoughtful design. We want to be smart about how we are bringing in affordability, preserving affordability, and have connectivity within those places and to other places. We want a development to bring in investment, to make things better, to address longstanding issues. Investment is a source of resources. It should not be extractive from existing communities. Hopefully we can get better infrastructure, services, and amenities come with that. We also heard concern about when new development comes in and just the things that can come in with that. Could be more crime, could be more traffic, could just be the loss of rural character as places change over time. So we have heard that. We also heard, and especially related to West Plains, some serious environmental concerns related to building in areas, especially without a full understanding of the landscape and the components of the landscape. We had a really well-timed, I think it was also like classical piano ringtone, right, at the last meeting. It was perfect, right after we asked for questions. So anyhow, concerned with groundwater, the PFAS groundwater contamination, being a big one, and then also the complicated aquifer situation and how that relates to flooding and other related water where you don't want it to be problems. And so the team has been looking into that. Also, wildlife corridors being an important thing. Understanding that wildlife is a part of this landscape, and wildlife is going to go from here to there, whether or not you build a bunch of stuff in the way. And so we need to be smart about where those corridors happen for wildlife to travel through. And also we want to recognize this is part of an effort. We're trying to build trust with communities, trying to kind of turn over a new page, a fresh new plan. The previous plan has some really good stuff in it, but it was just sort of had minor updates for the most part over the years. The opportunity to really rethink some things, to consolidate some things, make it work better, and also to kind of set the stage for more fruitful interactions with the public going forward in planning. We did the photo survey. We want to show pictures of things, neighborhoods, buildings, all sorts of different things, and see what people will like and would like to see when that new development happens. These are the most popular ones. Let's see, I have a pointer. Trail-oriented neighborhood, right? Basically a subdivision, but it's got green space and it's got trails integrated in. A nice little neighborhood scale, community third place, small business that fits in. It's a place that neighbors can go to and get together. Kind of similar vibe here. This is called Tomato Commons. Cluster of businesses with some common open space. Again, people can come together, meet their neighbors, hang out with their friends and family, and also, support businesses, local businesses. This was a building scale one that was popular. It's a duplex. This was, apart from the pub, this was the most popular building that we showed folks, and I think it's remarkable that it's a duplex, right? This is a shared wall home, but it's nicely done. It fits into the neighborhood, so that's great. People also reacted well to the idea that this historic streetcar suburb that was built more than 100 years ago, that has a main street with businesses. It's got homes, a mix of different home types. It's got green space. We can not replicate that because things have changed, but we can look back to that for inspiration. Some of the less popular images, right? We've got apartments in Ellensburg that just don't have a lot of charm, but also don't have a lot of that integration with other ways to get around. It's sort of just parking lot and building, and that's the whole thing that's going on. And similarly, when it's that happening and everything, all the developments are walled off from each other, it's just like, this is all one thing, this is all another thing. That was not very popular. Sort of commercial development that's very asphalt pavement oriented, not super popular as well, as you can see in a couple of these photos, and then the garage oriented houses. And so we used the feedback, what we heard about, the desires for new development, what people want to see, what people are concerned about, a little bit about the kind of images people respond to well, kinds of development in places, and use that to create a draft vision.
Thank you, Ian. So distilling this down into just a first draft placemaking vision statement, I'm gonna read this out, but I'll talk a little bit more about the components after this. So Spokane County's suburban lands are a mix of vibrant and connected communities. They feature integrated parks, trails, natural areas, and civic gathering places, a mix of housing types, and an accessible pedestrian-friendly neighborhood center, meaning kind of a place where you might have your shops to serve the neighborhood. And they will be resilient and integrate natural features as a community amenity. So that just kind of distills down many of the points that came out of both the visual preference survey and the other findings on our placemaking elements. So the next part is, flip to the next slide here.
All right, ready.
Here we go. So we'll get into some preliminary policies, and really there's 6 main placemaking policies that we want to talk about. And I'll dig into these here. First one being integrating environmental design and resiliency into any new developments, whether they're big or small. So this will help communities be resilient and taking advantage of environmental features to create place and an amenity for the community. So some of the details are identifying, protecting the critical areas, and also integrating those as not walling your community off from them, but integrating those as a positive feature of the community. Addressing and treating stormwater, don't build in the floodplains, but maybe even, build your homes a couple feet above the street level. Even if you're not in a floodplain, you sometimes get urban flooding after torrential downpour. So building the homes up that's a good idea. Conducting fire-wise practices, some of the boards over here talk about that. And, providing multiple ways to get in and out of the neighborhood is an important feature. And more shade trees, because summers could be getting hot. They're already hot to begin with, and could be getting a little bit warmer. So we've got an example here, and Riley, if you want to say a few things about how we can integrate these features.
Yeah, absolutely. So building off of what was shared, I know that this is hard to read, so if you're curious about kind of the labels on here, you can see it on this map over here. But some of the ideas for these new building areas include things like tree canopy cover that will help with heat and just creating a more aesthetically pleasing area for folks, and also using what the landscape already has and building that in rather than starting with a clean slate and having to plant all these new things. A mixed use of housing, so meeting people where they're at in their home journey, whether that's apartments, maybe it's a townhome, maybe folks are ready for a single family home or even an apartment complex. Incorporating green space that is shared, so not everyone needs to have their own individual yard or space around their house, but it allows it to be more dense. And then folks who are in shared spaces like townhomes, duplexes, or apartments that also have access to that green space. And you can see connected roadways that also make it more connected and accessible, and some green features like solar on folks' roofs, as well as green roofing and other things like that. So this is just kind of a rendition of ways that we can build these communities to be more sustainable and community friendly.
Thanks, Riley.
Also, make sure you check out their quiz. They've got a cool quiz poster as well, and the map where you can show where these.
Yeah, and our map would love to know your experiences with some of the climate challenges in the area. So stop by and help us in those on there.
Okay, the second major placemaking policy is street connectivity. It's super important, particularly when you're doing subdivisions and new development. So creating a connected grid of streets when developing new neighborhoods. And so this will just simply help to accommodate and serve the new development, promote bike and pedestrian trips if you've laid it out well, and creating a unique sense of place. So again, an example, similar development there, showing how in blue streets and in the brown could be trails and alleys and just other kind of non-street connections that help implement that. And so a code concept is something like this, where we try to make sure that we've got no more than 500 feet distance between a public street and, say, a through block connection or another street. So, you know, it doesn't have to be a street grid where it's perfectly every block square and you got streets everywhere. So the idea is adding a little flexibility by integrating some of these other through block connections. And by that, I mean like a trail or an alley or a shared street or a private street. And so we got some good local examples here out in Liberty Lake, near where we were last night, along the Centennial Trail. Some of the neighborhoods there have kind of taken advantage and built upon that access to the trail. And so here you can see the system connects to the Centennial Trail and built upon it. There's some pretty good mixed street grid. You got the freeway here, so naturally you can't do anything there, but everywhere else is pretty well connected. And then further to the west, an older area, and again, you can also see the grid here and how it's all centered around this Half Moon Park, right in the middle of the neighborhood. And things stem out from there, but you can also see the trail connections up to the Centennial Trail in areas where you've got alleys and the blocks aren't too big. So speaking of trails, trail network and integration, you know, I talked about this last time a few months ago. At this stage it's the time to get these trails in. And I know that there was a pretty good discussion about this when we laid out the maps here last time and how those could be integrated. So the policy concept is to plan for and implement an expanded network of trails in new development. And this is just simply an example that we did in another project showing how mixture housing types can be integrated and built around a network of trails. And here's an example of how you can code this. And you can say, well, provide 1 foot of trail for each 3 feet of perimeter around a new subdivision. So it's proportional. The bigger the trail gets, the more trails that have to be integrated into that subdivision. And by trails, I'm talking about a trail that's separated from a street, not just simply a sidewalk next to a street or an arterial. And so here's an actual example of that, showing a subdivision. And this is the equivalent of meeting that standard, is building a trail that goes all the way through it. And then you can see a small secondary trail, but you can see that the trail is integrated with the park. There's a couple of places where it's along a street, but for the most part, it's separated from the street and has like a park corridor. And in these cases, the homes would face the trail and not just simply have the backyard 6 foot tall fence along it and create an unsafe trail. And so this is an example. This was actually part of a project I was working on in Post Falls about 10 years ago. An actual parcel that was in their urban growth area next to a development is showing how you could do this to meet this objective. And these are simply examples of trails that have been implemented in other cities' codes. And again, another aerial examples of trails integrated with homes. And again, this is that same image Ian was talking about. It was a visual preference survey for trail-oriented development. And so the other thing is park integration, making sure that parks are integrated and they're not just leftover spaces that are undevelopable. By integrated, I mean where they're visible and accessible. And so an example how you can code that is say at least 60% of the park perimeter should be bound by either streets or homes that face the park. And so these photos are examples of that. Two of these here are where you got streets all the way around them. And then this one, you've got streets on two sides, but you got homes on the other. Their garages and access are served off of an alley in the back. So instead of a street, you've got a park. And I've seen a lot of examples of those more in new subdivisions all over the place. And then here's just an example of townhomes created around a small little green space, and where you got the fronts of the townhomes facing them. So you got lots of eyes on the space. And you got some great examples of this here, Corbin Park. Corbin Park's pretty big, but it benefits the whole neighborhood around it. You've got streets surrounding all sides. Another example is sorry, this is very sensitive. Okay. This is in Kendall Yards, Olmsted Green Park, which I jogged out to on this trail this morning. Again, it's surrounded by parks on three sides, and this is a future development pad. Right now, it's kind of a de facto dog park, and there's a bunch of people out here using that. And then you can see there's actually a sidewalk with homes facing this on the other side, but it's just a good example of integrating the park into the community. You've got a couple neighboring commercial, you got restaurants and neighboring commercial businesses down here, but very popular.
And hopefully, right, the houses that are right up against the park on that one side are faced into the park.
Yes, yes. So streetscape design, again, sorry for the looking sides, but streetscape design is one of the other key placemaking components. And here's some components of this are just making sure that your streets aren't too wide. I mean, make them wide enough to serve the function and make sure that they're safe. The cars can pass each other, but it's not so wide that cars are going to speed down the street and make it unsafe. Provide comfortable pedestrian access. A big part of that is planting strip with trees and separation there, so it just makes a comfortable place to walk. Integrated street trees for shade and community character, and a variety. Just make sure that you can allow for maybe a range of street widths for different situations. Maybe there's parking on both sides on most streets, but in some cases it may be parking on one side or no sides for some areas. And again, here's some examples. Again, this is where I was at this morning. South Hill example, this is a little skinnier, but an undesirable example is where you've got, again, a really wide street and you just see asphalt, no trees, road curb, sidewalks. Sure, it's easy to do, it's cheap, but you kind of get what you pay for in the long run with it. All you kind of see is cars. You don't see a sense of neighborhood. Question?
Now, one of the things that happens in these developments, if you specify, trees, the kind of things you want to in your ordinances, is the cheapo developers come in, meet the standards, and plant the dumbest trees. And how are you going to achieve the good trees that you're talking about in here? Can you put that in an ordinance?
Yeah, most cities and counties have a tree list that you choose from that are appropriate. And I think in this case, we want trees that are capable of creating shade and are resilient, trees that maybe don't have, some of the bigger roots that are gonna crack up the sidewalks. Also that can withstand tough urban
I
conditions.
understand the theory, the thing
Yeah.
is implementing it. That's
Sure.
Getting it.
Sure. So, and having some good standards, but also making sure that you're enforcing those standards
Thanks.
and implementing it. Another component to streetscape and neighborhood design is trying to avoid this type of look. I grew up in a neighborhood that all the arterials were just lined speedways with walls along them, and it just really does not create a good neighborhood feel overall. There's a better way to do it. Here's an example in Bozeman where you've got the homes that front these arterials are served by alleys. So therefore, they can even integrate parking back there, but you can have bigger setbacks. But that's kind of a way that you can avoid this type of a scenario. And then the last thing on here, at least for policies, is bringing it all together in neighborhood design. So a lot of this is just integrating all those other components I just talked about, integrating environmental design, street connectivity, trail and park integration in the streetscape design policy. But another part of it is integrating, trying to integrate both lot and housing type diversity into the neighborhood and into the at least larger subdivisions. And then also emphasizing neighborhood facing design instead of these walled off designs. And there's an example of this. Another thing to bring up here that we showed last night and talked about is a graphic that Burke Consulting did in talking about integrating middle housing and a mixture of housing types. And what this really emphasizes is in most everybody's lifespan, people usually live in different types of housings that are appropriate for that stage of their life. I certainly have, and probably many of us in this room have. So you might have one, when you graduate from high school or college, you might live in a fourplex where it's smaller and a bit cheaper. Then you might get married or move in together with your significant other and live in a cottage house over here in the upper right. Then maybe your first time, you've saved up some money, first time homeowners live in a townhouse. That was my wife and I, our first home ownership was in a townhouse. And as you might have kids and got a growing family, that's when maybe you're in your single family home, saved up a little bit more. And, percentage of families end up in separation, and that creates some challenges. And maybe at that point, you move back to a duplex.
So,
Being the rescuer.
where did I put that?
And then from there, you can empty nest and maybe you can live in an accessory dwelling unit.
Okay, anybody see a computer power supply around?
Do you have it for?
Oh, here it is.
Got a few more slides. Mostly, the next thing we want to talk about here is the land use map. And this is kind of a nice segue into the next steps once we get it going. But the county's got their land use map that sort of, it's not the zoning map, it's a layer above that sort of sets the policy for the land use in the county. And okay, so keep going here. So you've got land use categories. This is way too hard to read, but up top is their legend. So what are the land use categories used for? They're used to guide decisions on the zoning map, like zone changes, but also the development regulations themselves. And right now, this is in the comp plan, you've got these paragraph descriptions for all these land use categories, and you've got a lot of land use categories, and we're gonna try to distill them down into what's essential and probably reduce the number of them. And here's like a crosswalk. On the left is the existing, all these different land use categories, and on the right is how we kind of want to combine some, like for the commercial, there's 4 different mixed use related categories, and we want to probably just combine them all into one. Residential, most of those probably stay the same, except for maybe we can combine medium density and high, and also for bigger sites, I think it maybe a neighborhood designation might work, where you can have a little bit more freedom to mix up things. But where you've got a lot of areas, in some cases, may have already been developed, and so you want to stick with the left column to kind of match what's there. So here's an example of a land use category and our suggestions for how you lay it out. Rather just having this open paragraph describing it, it's important to kind of lay out what the purpose is. So this is an example for medium density, is to say, well, providing for a mixture of single, middle, and multifamily housing types. Locational criteria is important, so we know where to map these or know when rezones might be appropriate. So we might say areas intended for areas now characterized by and/or appropriate for a mixture of housing types with close proximity to commercial services, transit, public recreational amenities. And then the principal uses and densities. An example here says all residential uses, including all middle housing forms, low to mid-rise apartment buildings. So we're kind of talking about the form and the types, and ideally try to stay away from 5 to 10 units per acre, because a lot of people don't really understand what that means. And that doesn't really, by getting into forms of the building, that's more of what I think people think are more important, and gets into the scale of the development and what fits in areas. And then you say what the implementing zones are, so there's a clear connection. So how can this work with the suburban areas? And so, so here out in West Plains, we haven't really touched the light industrial and industrial areas. Those probably stay pretty much the same. But some areas, like the residential, these low density areas down here, they're largely spoken for, so those probably would stay the same. But up here, close to the 2 interchange, you got somewhat less developed areas. So that could be an example where this neighborhood designation could take hold, where we really have a chance to create a neighborhood up there. But this leads to the kind of the next step of this process, as we're going to be getting into alternatives. And Scott and Matt will probably talk about this coming up here, next steps.
Sure, thanks, Bob. These are some of the basic steps that we will be administering over the next few months via the county planning office. Those of you that follow what we do in planning recognize that for every one of those steps, there's 2 or 3 dozen subcomponents. So there's a lot of juggling going on, and there's a lot more analysis and research that will be happening. Beyond that last, and I'll go through this quickly. You can see all those things happening. The growth alternatives is taking this placemaking model and looking how that fits into the GMA elements, the following parts of that. And that will be done through the technical analysis of an environmental impact statement. And that is a GMA required step. It goes into significant detail on what are perceived to be significant negative environmental impacts of development choices. And so I know, especially here, that's of great interest to all of you, and that is the tool that we use that puts a scientific look at how development can fit in with the environment, in with the infrastructure, and whether it can or whether it can't. There becomes some defining lines there. So it's a very important statement. That starts this week. We are taking comments on what we call the scoping of that, or the initial determination of what ideas, what concerns do you have, what things you think we should be looking at. Those comments we're taking through the end of May, and then we will translate that into an initial statement. That draft EIS will be out later in the fall, and there will be another chance to comment on that, as well as agency comments, public comments, and other things. So that's a key structural step in the plan while we're doing these other pieces. More meetings as we move through, and then I think probably all of you know how to reach us through our web and other areas. The web is under continuous improvement, but there's always a place, and we're trying to keep it up on the front page for comments, for you to contact us directly. And also you can always reach us at our phone number. It's a good old fashioned technique that we still use, 509-477-1500. So with that, I do want to go back one slide, if we can. Because this is, this is kind of the ground zero of what I've come to learn in my time there, and what you've all learned well ahead of that. We have seen comprehensive plan amendments out here over these last 3 or 4 years. Those are processed again under the Growth Management Act rules, which meet one of these 6 criteria. If it does, it is eligible to move forward. What we're doing in the comprehensive plan process is taking a look at the entire area as a single unit and being much more thorough about how that should develop over time, not in 5 to 10 acre parcels that are coming in these disconnected pieces. And there's 2 parts of that, of course. The first is very specific to the county. You have all seen the things happening here, notably with the golf course, how that's starting to develop from the west end. There was a proposal for an amendment for the rest of the golf course a couple of years ago that did not go forward. The county is building a regional park just south of here. So this is kind of a test bed for the neighborhood concept. Can it work out here? Can we start to stimulate the right kind of development that will support small shops or convenience stores or something, so that there's something a little more convenient than having to, to go to Airway Heights or back to Spokane just to go to Rosemars. So we're using this as a really important example because it kind of fits what we've heard over these last few years, and because we know it's important to you because of the issues that are going on out here. So this is very much a key area. On top of that, we have one of our colleagues here from the city. One of the issues that we in the city of Spokane are talking about is what happens between I-90 and 195. There's a lot of activity in there. There's a lot of land. There's topography. There's critical areas. There's railroads. It's a very challenging place to do land use planning, and yet if we don't, it will develop of its own right, more or less, and it will become even more crowded and unplanned as it is now. So there's a detailed aspect of what we want to do along this part of the Westways, and then there's that bigger picture of how do you look at that as more of a 50-year horizon? What's going to happen? What do we leave for our successors to deal with after this next 20-year plan is done? So those are just a couple of tidbits I wanted to bring up. But after that, we're open to any questions you may have, as best we can answer them, about this process or other things on your mind. So, Barry.
Slide 2 for Bacchus, you said, don't build in the floodplains. What floodplains? There are no maps. Spokane County writes it on our dedication plat language, but yet there are no maps. Where are you getting this information from? There was a long time Spokane County sat down with FEMA at their discovery meetings and told them where the floodplains are. Because I understand FEMA creates these maps, but they can't do it without a floodplain administrator, environmentalist to get these reports, to hand them over at these discovery meetings. So when you have this language up here saying, we don't build in the floodplains, there are no maps. So first of all, that's just a quick statement thrown out there, because I'll tell you right now, this is a floodplain. This is a floodplain. This is a floodplain. This is a floodplain. And those are just 3 that I know of, but they're not in any maps with FEMA. The other issue with this is you guys need to know that FEMA just changed their requirements for NFIP insurance. So if you're not coordinating with them, you can lose your coverage. That means you'll have to pay for these disasters by yourself. They're not gonna come in and help you. Now I understand why Trump did what he did. That's why I reached out to his administration, let him know that this is how local governments are working. It's putting a lot of strain on the federal government, unnecessary strain, because local governments want haphazard planning. Choosing to leave this information out of our title reports, that is fraud. Omitting pertinent information from our title reports is fraud. It's a deceptive practice. So when you say they're going to keep us out of floodplains and stop building, however, you also want to make sure that that UJ in the West Plains, again, that map delineation that you have up there is the high risk drainage area. I have no idea what's going on here. I think we really do need to have a very open discussion about this. Getting my degree in EPP, so don't worry, I can speak your language. I got the jargon, okay? So what am I gonna do here, Scott?
Well, what we talked about earlier is that we're at what we call the concept stage, the idea stage of how we organize residential development differently than what we've done in the past. What we will be doing next is, through that environmental impact assessment lens, looking at environmental conditions, infrastructure conditions, floodplain conditions. The county in the 2001 plan, brand new GMA plan, did not fully link planning with capital facilities. We are doing that. So we're doing that for the first time.
In the 2005 Spokane County Comprehensive Stormwater Management Plan, it set up the entire $25 million bond for a stormwater regional treatment and disposal plant at SIA. We are paying for, and we don't have it. So we are being taxed for a benefit that we don't have. That again, sir, is fraud. Okay, so the fact that you didn't link your CFP with your comp plan, that's exactly why you have up here Spokane County /BP, building and planning. How about PW for Public Works, which then would incorporate our stormwater with building and planning, because I know that you guys have done this. It just pulled out the 9.14.215 unauthorized discharge of waters to a county maintained road. Now, all of a sudden, you scrap that, you throw it under and say, oh, no. That's a stormwater issue. So where's stormwater here, you guys? Do we have anyone from stormwater here? I'll wait. Anyone from stormwater?
Terry, excuse me,
Sure.
that's not the position, that's not what we're here for today. We
This is
understand,
exactly the issue we are having. We need all parties to be on the same side.
and we will get there. That is the difference in planning that we're doing in this round that was not done in the prior round.
Looks like you're not doing it this round,
I
either.
object to you monopolizing the meeting for things that aren't pertinent.
We were talking about my home flooded.
Let's
Let this
be
man and his
civil,
staff go
please.
ahead with what they're doing. Got it?
You don't dare tell me what to do, young
Please.
man.
Please stop or I will ask you to leave. We are going to be going through this effort. We will be involving all of our other departments, Public Works, particularly. We work very closely with them. Hasn't always been the case in the past. I agree. We're doing that in a different way this time. We're also working with the cities and with Fairchild Air Force Base. So we're building a better team to understand what's going on, particularly in the West Plains. It has not been effective as you would like in the past. We're going to try to improve that, but we have to start by knowing what it is we want to correct from some of our past practices. And then we can look at the technical issues to see, can it happen here? If not, why? And if that cannot be fixed, can that be mitigated in some way? Can it be repaired in some way? Most of these answers will come in these next few months. You'll see how this wraps up between now and September, when our steering committee meets again, and then they have a last meeting in November. By November, a lot of this should have gone through that deliberative process with public meetings. And so we can look at this and say, we're confident, here is a solution that we can afford. It may not be the perfect solution. The perfect solution could involve a lot more money than we can ever put into it, but we can find our way through what we can afford. So give us a chance. We'll do our best to address all of your concerns. Yes.
Thank you, Scott. Thank you all for being here. We do appreciate it. I'd like to see a show of hands. How many people live out here on the West Plains? Okay, so I've already expressed to Mr. Chesney that it's very inconvenient that this is in the middle of a day and a week. We hope that these, like the other meetings, will be held in the evening. Given that, I'd also like to say there's a reason that we are ultra emotional about here, and we live here, we're impacted. They kayak in the streets of her subdivision when the belt is on, and they have year-round sump pumps. I live on a contaminated well with increasing PFAS from 18 to 2024. So the PFAS coming off the airport is increasing. So, and if any of you lived here and were enduring these various conditions, you would be hair on fire just as much as we are. Given that, I'd like to first start with this UGA boundary that you have delineated on your maps. And that is, and I asked Mr. Chesney, how is that boundary established? What kind of analysis was done to arrive at that? And I'd like to ask you to show your work at that next meeting, if possible. That would be great.
Yep.
The next thing, as I understand now, the next workshop that will be held will address environmental issues and impacts and concerns. Okay. So just so you know, one of the two areas you depicted as potential desirable neighborhoods, the northeast one there, is the area where the highest stormwater runoff has the highest PFAS coming off the West Plains. Now, you all know that the West Plains is a kind of a high point and all kind of drains to the river, which we've spent decades and billions trying to clean up from PCBs. So just stick that in your brains as you're planning and designing, because that is not a desirable neighborhood. I'm here to tell you. And the one that was depicted down near the Medical Lake exit, the kind of the southwest one, is the place where they kayak. I have photographs. Terry has plenty of photographs of them kayak. So the impact, in a sense, this design charrette here is more than it is the cart before the horse. Because if you don't know what the underlying conditions are and the underlying impacts, then I don't care what kind of configuration you do for parks and street-facing homes or alleys or whatever, you're blowing right past the real baseline issues that we face every single day. I also want to point out, I haven't heard anything about aviation impacts. You know that the airport is just around the corner and Fairchild is 4 miles due east of here. They all have aviation impact zones, no-bull places where you cannot build beneath where their planes are traveling. Some of the issues we're in, I'm in a rural area. Terry's in a residential, about a rural, quasi-resident urban thing. Even though your boundary does not include, well, it does include some rural areas in the county, but the existing problems out here have to do with, you've heard us spiel about groundwater quantity and quality and PFAS contamination. So if we don't know if this area even the boundary that you depicted mysteriously. Where's, if you can't have water, you cannot have homes. So we, again, cart before the horse. Where's the infrastructure? Where's the water? Does the city of Spokane have enough water right to serve all of this glorious new housing you're depicting? Big question mark. You don't have water, you build a house, or leave the keys on the counter if you run out of it. A document that really needs to be visited before this comprehensive plan can get put together is the critical aquifer recharge area that was supposedly updated in 2018. I understand that it was sort of dragged across in 18, and turns out we knew about PFAS from the airport in 2017. So our representative bypassed telling anybody about it and let this CARA ordinance complete. Please go to the critical aquifer recharge area ordinance and see how that integrates into all of the massive work that I recognize that you're doing. There's a lot of elbow-grease here, and I appreciate it, but you can't. The dance is contorted here. Out here, we have, as I said, groundwater quantity and quality issues. We don't have an alternative. We're on sole source wells. If these designated neighborhood areas get water from the Spokane Valley or the Prairie Aquifer, yeah, could give it a try, but you're also filling wetlands on the way. We have massive wildfire. We know that wildfire happens everywhere, in every possible urban, suburban, rural, sub-rural areas. The Palisades in California, Great Fire here up north. I had it burned to 100 feet of my property some years ago. Also out here, almost everywhere, the county roads are substandard. They are fraying at the edges. They are not built for the enormous increase in delivery truck traffic. Your Amazon, your UPS, your other ones, FedEx, they run up and down our streets all day long now. And these roads are not built for it. The county road repair crew has been out all week just on Grove Road, where it flooded because they filled the wetland. And it's got potholes bigger than this, and a contractor that chows out the bottom of his truck trying to go through it. So we've got wildfire, we've also got wildlife displacement, which should be a concern for anybody, whether you live in the subdivision or in a high-rise downtown. You need wildlife, you need diversity, you need diverse habitat, and these kinds of projects will definitely eliminate that. And then also transit is practically non-existent. Now, it may work in this corridor you've identified, but you better coordinate with STA because they're, try as they might, they are not really serving the populace. Certainly those that don't exist in the really heavy urban core. Then the other is that the state legislature recently passed legislation that requires transit-oriented housing development. So there is some mention of transit here and congestion, and if you happen to drive Highway 2, it is like driving up the old Division Street. It is nothing but congested. You can time it between 9 and about 11:30, and then after 6 p.m. That's when you're not sitting in bumper to bumper on Highway 2 going east and west. I swear, I'm not making this up. Also, we've got, my big concern about any of this has to do with maintenance. We build new roads, and next year there's probably weeds that are knee high. Okay, we have out here the waste energy plants out over there. We have garbage hauling and we have incineration. The roads leading into the incinerator, it looks like a Mardi Gras parade any day of the week. Occasionally they'll come pick it up, but the roadways are just strewn with loose garbage coming out of the garbage trucks as well as the unsecured loads. So maintenance of facilities that are plugged down out here is dismal at best. So I'd like to ask the next time you come back to us, please bring the rationale and your work that shows how you establish this boundary. And also some cognizance that you've got 2 flight lines out here, military preparedness and millions of travelers. And if they're not gonna let you plug a little subdivision under their flight zone, you're barking up the wrong tree. And then the next thing is, I understand the next workshop is environmental. When will you announce that? Because I've heard nothing about that. And I would appreciate that, and I will notify the 100+ people on my neighborhood list. And then, I have to ask you, this constant use of the word resilient. Could someone please tell me what resilient means? I do not know what resilient means. Does it mean your umbrella sheds water? Is that resilience? Does it mean that you create a subdivision and all of a sudden you've got communities? I think you're designing for the wrong society. We are no longer a very social society. And whether we cluster around a park or provide trails, I'm not sure you're gonna get the community warm fuzzy that you're sort of presenting here each time I've been here. So that's it. Thank you for listening. I appreciate it.
And I truly appreciate the fact that you've you whittled down your list to give us the easy things to answer. That's very kind of you.
I'm not meaning to torture anybody, but I live here. Come slide into my shoes.
And you've highlighted the difficulties out here. And they are massive. When John West Kelly was worrying about stormwater, nothing ever happened. So, real small.
Well, I would say come to my house, I'll get you some lemonade or some ice water, and see if you want to drink it. I've got some of my entire in-house.
They built my island for $500,000 big
So
reservoir.
that
You,
brings up another massive problem, which has to do with property values and the impacts of contamination. Which we're waiting for our deputy assessor, Joe Hollenbach, to bring us a report. He's promised that, and we're waiting patiently.
You mentioned cart before the horse. The reason we call these groups charrettes is it's a derivative of an old design term. It's a French word, and it comes from cart or chariot. And where it came to be is design students from the 1800s on took it as sort of a mantra that as they were going to present their work to their professors or somewhere else, they would climb into the back of the cart with the donkey and they'd be working on their various things all the way up to the presentation. When you describe, those dozen or more attributes, that's what we do. We take all of that and try to deal with it individually, and then how does it work with each other? How does it fit with each other? So you kind of hit on it, maybe inadvertently. I'll do a couple of those. Airports are easy. We know what the overlays are. We know where the airport control zones are, the airport safety zones. We didn't put them on the map. All those lines are marked out. The county and the city of Spokane in 2012 put into our zoning code what was called the joint land use study, which draws a line and protects Fairchild from encroaching development of any further intensity than what was already planned in that time. So we're very much aware of that. The UGA line, those were drawn originally in 2001 when the county did its first GMA plan. They're based on essentially how much land do you need to grow at your urban densities over the next 20 years to accommodate the growth that's forecast for your area. And that's pretty much it, the direction in the first time. So that's where they came from. Spokane County and our various cities have updated those plans periodically. At first every 7 years, now we're on a 10-year cycle to update it. That's why we're here now in 26. That boundary may or may not change, but it'll be based on where are we going to grow over the next 20 years and where can we grow over the next 20 years, which is back to that stormwater infrastructure contamination, suitability equation. It may not mean expansion in the West Plains. It might be in the north area by Meade. It might be in the Moran Prairie off the corner of the city. It could be off by Salty's uplands in the valley. That's the equation that we, with all of our city counterparts, are looking at. Where is it most suitable to grow if we need to grow outside of our existing boundaries? So that is taking place. That's another step that you will see somewhat at our steering committee of elected officials in May, an update of what we've done so far. And then in July, will be kind of a discussion of what does this mean for the geography of that urban growth area. So that's coming in later in the summer and in the fall. All of those other issues that you talked about, I have learned an enormous amount of those since I've been here in 21 with these comprehensive plan amendments and just doing our study work around that. From FEMA maps to paleo channels to all of that, we really are gathering that information to use it all as effectively as we can to plan for growth in this area. So we're here today at kind of the upper end of a concept or idea. If it was even one step before that, it would be what we call a bubble diagram. It's like, well, here's a good place for housing. Here's possibly a place we could do housing. This is one step past that, just to talk about the form, because we as planners, and I think most of you in here and other areas, are frustrated at the pattern of development in these urban growth areas in the past, where it's just 10 acres out of nowhere and 20 acres out of nowhere that gets carved into a subdivision. Our colleagues at the city, when the county created the 2001 plan and subsequent plans and laid out that lilac area for light industrial development, the city, as you know, is a sewer and water provider out here for that area. Well, they looked at that and look at that agreement and say, okay, we can plan for that. We can plan for light industrial use. We know what those ranges of intensities are. Subsequently, in the last 10 years, for sure, bits and pieces of that light industrial area have become fairly dense subdivisions at 4.5 units an acre. Residential water use is different from industrial water use. It can be more, it can be less. But it's put the city and the county in a challenging position because they planned for one thing and we've changed it based on trying to reflect the markets. So a big part of the West Plains planning is to better coordinate where the city and the county are so that they, as the water utility provider, can better understand how this is going to happen. So it's all of these pieces that we're going to be working on. I don't know when we'll be out next time. We haven't planned that. Our next round of conversations is involving our rural areas. We're going to be in Valley Ford next week, Cheney and Deer Park the week after. So we're gathering our rural sides, and then we'll be starting to bring all that back together as part of this environmental impact statement. So that comment period ends after Memorial Day. I would expect probably late June would be the next time we would have something to share from what we find in that period.
But I'd like to ask you why you wouldn't hold a rural area workshop here on the 130 square mile West Plains. It includes Airway, Medical Lake, Cheney, Ford Lakes. But we're kind of getting shunted off the side.
Fair question. And if we can think our schedule in a way, and we're not trying to do these as one in depth. We're trying to say, well, we've never been out to these areas to talk about comprehensive planning. Let's go do that. But where else do people want to talk about it? Here's a pretty good example. Yeah, we should have something, out here. We talk with our cities, Medical Lake, Airway Heights, Cheney, frequently, but we haven't yet explored, in a sense, the straight western side of the county. We've looked at the Palouse area, we've looked at Cheney, or we are looking at those, and we've looked at the north part. This is very much something that we should be putting into that mix. So we'll do that.
I have to agree, because this is where you're pushing all the growth. This is this is where the open space is, plunk down the houses and the Amazon warehouses, really warehouse ghettos, but it's that part is turning into. But one of the biggest breath-holding problems that I have with this process is that there's just too much omitted. There's too much information that is not being presented, and you're asking people to vote and vote online, and all of a sudden you've got preferences for housing. But we don't know, is there sewer, is there water, is there power? You happen to know that this area, the airport, Fairchild Air Force Base, and Italy Heights is provided water from the Spokane Valley Aquifer.
Mm-hmm.
Where, how are they gonna provide water to all these thousands of dwelling units?
We
That's
we
coming.
have to start somewhere in the conversation. And so we've chosen this because it's something that most people will understand the difference between a boxy subdivision and a neighborhood. So that was something we thought would be a good conversation starter. All of that detailed infrastructure, I mean, because you have lived it out here, you know it backwards and forwards. Awful lot of people don't even think about it. They turn the tap and everything's fine. We've got all that stuff chugging away in the background, and we'll bring that forward. When we come out to a West Plains event, we'll bring that more detailed information as much as we can, as much as we have.
Well, I've got for detail, here's a depiction of the east side of the West Plains and the west side of the West Plains, Fairchild. These are the areas of PFAS contamination.
We have that, you've given that to us.
And we want to ask you to ask us for it. We know about wetlands, we know about substandard roads, we know about wildfire, we know about traffic congestion that was unbelievable. We know about a transload facility, it's like the bridge to nowhere. That they have put gazillions of dollars in, that's out on Craig Road, which is in the area of the serious Fairchild PFAS contamination. And, it would be wise to point the resources towards the most effective things.
Absolutely
And
true.
that's not news to you, Mr. Chairman.
No, that is absolutely true, and that is why we're making such an effort to link capital facilities to comprehensive planning, at least in a way that the county hasn't done in 10 years. Because at some point, the county board has to look at this and say, what can we afford? And it falls to their decision, and they represent you. So we would have to present them with a range of things to say, here's the recommendation, here's what the costs are going to be. Is this sustainable?
We wish they represented us. Our representative has not done their job.
I would leave that off of today's table, but thank you.
This gentleman had a question.
No, I just wanted to tell you, Scott, this just reiterated, they had promised that open can't happen if it can't be serviced. They promised that's what it falls under the label of capital facilities. So as this moves out,
Okay, just check it.
as part of the GMA process is that the obligation is to set standards, relevant standards, and certain standards such that you can actually afford the service. That's exactly what you were talking about. I'm just reiterating what we've been hearing for the last year and a half. The promise capital facilities planning will be done. Place can be served. The zoning of the land use will reflect that. That's what we have, then we check the work.
To include us, we residents in this, there's 2 of us out of 20.
We will.
We need more outreach.
We will, and any outreach program can never be perfect. What we try, we ask for your email addresses. We try to get into databases. Rona has joined us as our planning commission clerk, and she's doing wonderful work. But she's also trying to update an email database that's like 4,000 names long. So we're really trying to get a better handle on who needs to be in the loop for any one thing without sending a blast to a lot of people that don't care. But we'll our commitment to you is that we will come out here and talk to you about the details, and we will keep you involved on all of the decisions and all of the ideas that are happening in the comp plan.
Thank you.
And I think that's all we've got. So, thank you all very much. I appreciate your thoughts, and we will continue to reach out.
I was there, I was there. Yeah. Wanted up there, Cheney.